Hey guys, my name is Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing another 360 book review, which is where I talk about a book in 360 seconds and try and give you a full 360 view of what it's all about. The Great Library series by Rachel Caine is a series of books of which there are 4 out currently, and there is a 5th one planned to be out either later on this year in 2019 or in early 2020. I thought about waiting to do this video until all the books were out, but I'm too psyched about these books to not just do it now already. Ink and Bone was published in 2015, which means it is one of Rachel Caine's latest series that she's working on. She's a very prolific author. You may know her name from things like the Morganville Vampire series, and she has a series of thrillers out at the moment as well. So, what's it all about? The Great Library series focuses on one major premise and kind of continues from there, and the idea is, what if the Library of Alexandria did not get burnt down and destroyed way back in kind of ancient times, and instead became a powerhouse form of government that became sort of the control of the world. There is a lot of magical realism thrown in here. The world doesn't quite develop in the way that our one does. So basically, books are forbidden. There is only one copy of each book in existence, and instead everybody else has these kind of e-reader type things that the library will upload what it wants its society to be reading. There are these things called like obscurists, who basically have some kind of power that's not fully gone into in any real way, and these are the ones who can kind of control that sort of thing. And there's an element of like steampunk mechanical creatures brought to life that sort of is a continuing theme. So there's a little bit of magic thrown in, a little bit of tech stuff thrown in. It doesn't really fully ever explain its magic system because it's not the kind of book that necessarily needs to, because that's not the main focus. So book 1 follows our main character Jess Brightwell, who is the son of like a criminal overlord who is basically the main guy who does book smuggling, and he has now got a job as an apprentice at the library in Alexandria, and he's going to be learning to become part of them. And the idea is that he's supposed to be feeding this information back to his dad. However, he doesn't really feel too comfortable with this. He has an obsession over books that his father doesn't really understand, and he doesn't view them in the same way as his father, as like a commodity, and it all sort of spirals from there. There's a huge cast of characters. Obviously a lot happens. We're now 4 books deep, and I'm clearly not going to go into all the books because it would take to spoil it for you, but basically the general gist is there's kind of government conspiracies and corruption, and it's looking at the ways that they can kind of overtake this with everything else that's going on. It's very political in nature, and there are a lot of characters, so there's a fair amount to keep track of. So for me, the things that make this book series so strong are, as I said, pretty much the characters and the politics. It's a really cool idea, and it is executed very well. I think that Rachel Caine makes a very consistent world that makes sense as to how it's played out, and its world building is strong and internally sound, and it just makes sense. There are things that she doesn't talk about, but she actively doesn't talk about them, which means that she narrows her scope down to things that are actually realistically able to be covered. There's nothing more irritating than in fantasy or in magical realism when world building tries to touch on everything and doesn't do a good job of any of it. I don't really mind if there's a bit of a gap in your world building, so long as you don't then try and address that badly, or indeed exploit that gap later on. Like this magic system, it's never really fully explained, but it's also not really a crucial part to the story, so I don't really mind that. I think that it's excellent for characters. I love all the characters in this book. I would be really hard pressed to say who is my favourite. I think that they are interesting and deeply flawed in very different ways, and the representation alone is incredible. We have characters who are on the LGBTQIA+ spectrum. There are also people from all sorts of different walks of life. There's really lovely points about kind of religious sensitivity and excellent representation on that part. Just generally, I think Rachel Caine does a really wonderful job of packing her books with fantastic, well-rounded, interesting people from all walks of life without making any of it feel like tokenism, which is wicked. It's also got the most brilliant discussions of some really cool ideas that I just absolutely love. I love it when a book takes a topic and like a story, and uses it to then talk about things that are important and interesting. For example, some of the things that get talked about in these book series is stuff like censorship, and should the government censor people, and what does that mean when you have freedom of speech, and how should that work, and how does the freedom of the press work, and what about fake news, and what do we mean by fake news, and how can we show what isn't fake. Also, it's got a really interesting look at things like the history of ideas, and the idea of like, you can't stop human progress and you can't stop human knowledge, and just because you've stopped Joe Bloggs inventing it over here doesn't mean that Joe Bloggs over there isn't going to invent it pretty much at the same time. And this idea of like the continuation of human progress regardless of the name on the patent or the person who actually did it. And this is something that you can see in the real world when you have things like the invention of Pythagoras' theorem has been found in all sorts of different spots. Calculus has been, I'm pretty sure it was calculus, has been widely disputed. There's a whole fight between Newton and Leibniz about who came up with some mathematical theorem there. It's just really cool, and it's something which I think this book does really, really well. If I had to point to one weakness of this book, and I really think that there is only one weakness, it's that basically the plot has got really repetitive, and that's really unfortunate. Book 1 stands out as being very strong, and then book 2 was pretty darn good as well. However, book 3 and book 4, I couldn't really tell you a crazy amount about what happens. Basically, the plot just becomes Jess and his band of friends leap from out of the frying pan into the fire, and then back into the frying pan, backwards and forwards, getting kidnapped by various different factions and groups and passed around like some big sort of like pass the parcel, except the music never really stops. So in that respect, I don't really know exactly where Rachel Caine's going to go with this series or how the last book is going to play out. I think because the characters are done well enough that I don't really mind the fact that they're all just kind of leaping around doing roughly the same thing over and over again, because actually it's fun to watch them do that thing over and over again. But I can see why some people would find that really irritating. I think that's all I have time for. This can be really, really difficult to fit in, and I'm talking so quickly now. So have a wonderful reading. We'll chat to you soon. Bye!